they take a 30% cut, I guess what they're saying, of the models and data you're uploading.
The buyers have the budgets to spend and they want to spend on localization, and I'm sure that they will once they can.
The vast majority of SmartLink's revenue comes from technology. But I think that as soon as you begin to combine these things together, as soon as you begin to combine a platform with the ability to customize with language services, you get a ton of benefits from this.
And welcome to Slated Pod 58 on this chilly February day here in Zurich.
Hi from London.
Yeah, so we're freezing. We're freezing here, but we'll survive. Spring's around the corner.
Freezing here too.
Yeah, what a busy week. I don't know, maybe the freeze is trying to, stop the busy enough this week. Anyway, that was the opening. So today we got Jack Weldy, CEO of SmartLink, on the pod as the guest. So
very good.
So SmartLink obviously is one of the largest tech-enabled LSPs. You know, they used to be full pure SaaS, then added services, have been growing at a nice clip over the past 10 years, and very much at the center, the core of the translation localization industry. So yeah, looking forward to talking to Jack. And also just briefly, we got a number of cool jobs on LockJobs. So Canva, my favorite SaaS tool, is hiring a German and Korean language manager. Well, a German language manager and a Korean language manager. So
okay, not two in one.
not two in one. No.
Okay.
And then MemSource is hiring a group business analyst. Systran, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is hiring a pre-sales consultant. And Lengo, which we're also going to be talking about soon, is hiring a community manager. And I think even XTM actually, which just came in as a breaking news, is also hiring. I think that was last week. So they're hiring a content writer, I think. So on the agenda today is XTM raising growth capital, Lengo raising venture capital. Then we're going to talk about machine translation data and model marketplaces. So machine translation data and model marketplaces. The two things. Mm-hmm. And Media Localizer Plint has a new CEO. You're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Cool. So just breaking news. Again, we're always recording this one day before we actually publish. So XTM, the TMS, one of the leading TMS, has just raised capital. In fact, at the time of recording this, it's still under embargo. So by the time it comes out, it'll be public. So from a company called K1 Investment Management I Googled them just now. I think they're based in LA, Los Angeles. So,
okay.
Or near LA. And, we're sending questions right now, and let's see if we can maybe disclose some of the size of this funding. The press release that I'm looking at isn't, but we'll definitely speak about that funding in the next Slated Pod. XTM also sits really at the core of the translation localization industry. They have a lot of enterprise clients and are a very key, key provider in this industry, of course, key technology platform in this industry. So good for them. They were started, good for them. They were founded in 2002. So almost 20 years been around. CEO Bob Willens, Andre Sidron founded the company, and, quite often when we talk to enterprise clients about localization, either XTM or SmartLink come up as the end provider. So they're really set at the heart of this industry. So congrats to XTM. Again, we're probably going to get some more details as the week progresses, and we'll speak about it in the next podcast. Esther, then we have Lengo, not pure tech, but AI agency. Let's just use that term now. AI agency. Can you just tell us a bit more about the key details of this funding round, and then I'll walk through some of the rationale.
Yeah. So another big funding round, $20 million US. So this is the Series B funding round. So second or third time probably they've raised for Berlin-based Lengo. And it was funding was led by Amsterdam-based Inkef Capital. So they've now currently raised in total $34 million. So it's a sizable amount that they've raised to date, including that. And I think also we've got a list of the existing investors that participated again in this round, which is Red Alpine, which I think we've spoken about previously as well, haven't we? It's being invested. Yeah. Creator Ventures and Techstars, and a number of angel investors also. And then a couple of new investors who entered into this round were Polypo Ventures and Volker Pertek. Oh, sorry, that's a person. I was like, that's a strange company name. Volker Pertek, senior advisor at Inkef. Sorry. So the Inkef, which was the lead investor. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. And I think Lengo has good traction already. So they said, I mean, they're not disclosing any revenue figures, but they're saying they did increased ARR, that software kind of metric, annual recurring revenue, 6-fold over the past 12 months. Obviously, we don't know what the basis of this was, right? So if you have a low base, then, maybe, let's say the absolute amount might not be huge, but, since they're raising that type of money, seems like they have a good amount of traction. In terms of the clients, they list like National Instruments, Sixt, the WWF, and the company that I know, Sunrise Communications. That's a Swiss telco. Actually, the internet that I'm using here is running over Sunrise, so they're number one. I think number two Swiss telco. So Lengo is one of those new latest generation LSPs built on the thesis that you take the best of what MT can offer, but you also understand that MT alone isn't enough for many of the enterprise use cases. If you really want to own the entire value chain from a customer, you can't just do it using MT. You also need to, of course, train the MT and then use expert human translators. So Tom Tongush, the partner in charge of the Lilt investment, I think it was Red Point, not Red Alpine, but Red Point that invested in Lilt, and he was at our San Francisco conference. He coined that term at the conference, AI agency, right? And I think Lengo would probably be labeled. We can call Lengo also an AI agency. Again, NMT at the core, but realizing that translators are key to really delivering the final quality output. They gave us some sectors, in software, e-commerce, businesses, basically anything that has a ton of volume. And they were going to use the funding to do expansion in Europe, but then soon they say they were going to go to the US and really offer 24/7. Interesting what the partner, the Inkef, that's the VC, what the operating partner said about the investment on the record. He said, Lengo is a tech company at its core. Hence, for us, the experience of investing in tech companies was far more important than the experience in the field of language services. So from the VC side, they really look at this as a technology company, which, is interesting because the services component is still quite critical. Christoph Krenzler, the CEO, and let's just go through a few of the things that he told us about this and about how they run the business. So he said that they found that output from well-trained MT Lengo translators make no changes to approximately 40% of the new material. So they need to change 60%, but 40% of the material can basically pass through unchanged if you train the engine well enough. And then they also said they do frequent in-house experiments comparing revision for generic MT, the main specific MT, and Lengo custom trained MT, and then measure the edit distance just to see how, really how custom and trained those engines are. Interestingly, they say they need about 150,000 translated words per use case and per language, or per case and per language, to what they call initialize a system. And he also says, Christoph, that this is usually not a problem for enterprise customers. I mean, having 150,000 translated words, that's not a tall hurdle. Yeah, that's not a tall hurdle to clear. In terms of their approach, They have 3 approaches, like what they call automated steps, right? So they take the data, they clean and prepare the language data from the client, augment it with some publicly available data to enrich the engine. They model it so it adheres to the client's rules, and then they create and deploy the models in what I presume is their internal, CAT tool, translation productivity tool. So. This is the way things go. I mean, we're seeing this from traditional LSPs as well, that they're basically trying to, obviously to not lose. Well, what's the term here? I'm blanking on the non-German thing, but they're trying to.
What do you mean, like lose ground, or? Yeah,
exactly, lose ground. Yeah, so to keep. To not catch up, but to not like fall behind, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, when you raise this amount of money and you have no legacy, obviously you have quite the speed there. So, which brings me to the next point here that I want to talk about. And sorry, it's I think it's a little bit much talking from my side here, but we just stuck that out. But we can share this later. So. Their approach that I just outlined, clean, model, and create and deploy the model, has competition, which was something I also want to bring up from places like Systran, PureMT, and for example, Taos as well. And I don't think connecting the two is very far-fetched. So we just picked up on our sweep service today. That's the daily email we're sending out to our subscribers, right? That Systran has launched this so-called Systran Model Studio. And let me just try to explain this. It's not easy, so I hope I don't butcher this. But basically, they have about 260 production-ready domain specialized translation models now as part of a library, but that those models are not necessarily built by Systran, but anyone can submit their data to Systran, train and build the model, and then choose to either use the model for their own purposes, or actually sell the model in a data in a marketplace for others to use that model, right? So I guess to connect the dots here with Lengo, I mean, Lengo has everything proprietarily. They customize everything, and then they use it to make their own linguists more productive, thereby becoming more competitive as a company, right? Companies like Systran, and we'll speak about later also Taos, they will offer enterprise and also LSPs that may not be as technologically up to speed as a company like Lengo that has probably MT and ML engineers. They offer them to build their own models, or if they have data, build models and even monetize this. So it's very, very interesting. So there's a couple of steps involved here. And Esther, maybe you can just walk us through the 3 or 4 steps here. I think preparation, training, and publication. But
yeah. So I guess this is with the Systran model.
Systran, that's right. Yeah.
So users will be uploading their bilingual or monolingual in-domain corpus, so the data essentially. And then Systran has proprietary technology that is able to clean and prepare the data, which will then go into training the model, which is the second step. So model training with Systran Model Studio. So that allows you to select from within Systran's model catalog and decide what starting point model, so I guess like a base model that you want to use, which one you're going to be enhancing, basically. What are you going to start with and then add your data to? And then they've got sort of added stuff like they do embedded, and I don't really know what all of these things are, but they do embedded UD sampling, augmentation, filtering, noising, and tokenization. So that's
just
some
when you
stuff.
when you have data like that, it's noisy. There's things that you need to take out, probably anonymization, things like that, right? So that's presumably that's what like companies like Lil and Lengo do internally and have the capability for. But if you're just quote unquote just an LSP that doesn't have deep tech experience. I mean, how are you going to do all that, right? So you should maybe either rely on like some plugged in engine, like a more generic one, or you start to lose to some of those more tech savvy companies. So, and then, once you've built all that, there's the evaluation and publication, so you can make sure that that it stacks up well in terms of the Blur score, etc. But then the kicker here is that you can actually sell it. So you have the data, you build the model, and you can then publish it on Sistrand's translation model catalog, and then their end users are able to use the model, test it, and purchase it. So that's cool. So you can purchase it, or of course, if you don't want to, if you don't want to sell it. If you don't want to monetize it, you can just keep it for yourself. Like it's just to enhance your own processes here. And you can keep, they call it 70% of royalties. I guess that would be, I'm not sure if royalties is the right, I guess 70% of revenue. I mean, you can just, they take a 30% cut is, I guess, what they're saying of the models and data you're uploading. So currently they have 14 data sellers, as far as I can see, and around 260 models. So among the data sellers are a few, AFP, Agence France Presse, AFP, Crosslang, Dragoman are from the LSP side, Kern, and then also they list TED and Mozilla.
And Taos. But Taos is listed.
And Taos is listed. So, which brings me to the next quick thing. So Taos also recently launched their marketplace where they're not selling, and I really hope I'm getting this right, they're not selling the MT engines, but they're selling the data you can use to train the engines, right? So basically, you sell the data. So if you want to sell your data, you upload, they clean, Taos cleans this, you set the price and you publish. And then from buying it, you explore the data, you filter the results, you purchase and download, and then you rate and review. So it's a nice marketplace. So people should head over to Taos and look at that. It's very slick, very well done. And currently they have about 25 sellers on the marketplace, including individuals, but that may really scale very quickly. So in my view, the difference between Sistrand and Taos is in Sistrand, you can upload, train, and build the model, and then you can choose if you want to keep it to yourself or sell it to somebody else. And with Taos, you can upload the data and sell it, and somebody else can just buy it, but they don't, Taos doesn't build any MT models for you, right? So that's the difference. I guess that's also why it's only marginally competitive, and Taos then can sell the models they've built using their own data on Sistrand. So it's all becoming kind of interwoven there. But again, the final take on this, kind of the long short take, is I guess one of the key issues is security, but I don't think security, like the data security, is really a technical issue, but it's kind of more of a perceptual issue. I'm sure there's ways to anonymize that data. But it's definitely interesting to see much more custom MT becoming more accessible, and that there's some marketplaces out there, right? So companies like Lengo, like these companies that really focus on using custom MT to drive productivity. I mean, they also face competition from these more open approaches and just making custom MT much more accessible to the wider LSP ecosystem. So interesting developments there. All right. Moving from machine translation to media localization, which so far hasn't been a heavy user of machine translation. So what's going on in MediaLock?
Yeah, well, I suppose the specific portion of MediaLock would be Plint. So this is a media localization provider based in Sweden, and they have a new CEO as of the 1st of February. So this is Thomas Roberts, who has joined Plint, replacing former CEO Orjan Cerner. Cerner has moved across to the board of directors, along with a number of other people from Plint, who are also sitting on the board. So that's Per Nortlier, who's the co-founder, the head of studios, and there's also a representative chairperson from Privek, which is their majority private equity backer, which I think we'll remember they got well, they became majority owner of Plint last spring. So a bit about the new CEO, Thomas Roberts. So Thomas, he comes from a pretty deep product management background based in the telecom industry. And this sort of reflects the idea that Plint is becoming more of a product orientated company. That's what they've told us previously. They're going to continue to focus on the tech and continue to ramp up on some aspects of the dubbing services as well, because they only do a bit at the moment. But specifically on the product, they're looking at, how to package the product for different markets, different customers. They currently have something called Plint Core, which is the company's cloud-based proprietary software. So it includes a translation management system, TMS, which they use internally, but they also license it externally to customers. I think they've got Viacom CBS using it currently, which is good. And we asked them a little bit, how do you see the landscape? Do you see pure play translation and localization TMS providers as a threat, as competitors, and in their view, it's a kind of complementary offering rather than a competitive or competing offering. Plint saying, there's enough space in media localization for all of these different solutions. Anyway, but in pre-pandemic, we spoke to them a little bit about how things had been going. So pre-pandemic, they were kind of really storming. They had, I think, doubled the number of people in that they were employing to 50 over 2 years, and they grew something like 40% in 2019. So that's pre-pandemic. So they were around $20 million in 2019, I think. And they told us for 2020, they grew revenues, but they didn't grow as fast as the pre-COVID forecast. But overall, they said we're extremely happy with what they achieved in 2020, obviously under the circumstances. That's a bit about Plint.
We've spoken to a number of media localizers. Is anyone seeing restarting of original production like in a broader way, or is everybody still just kind of waiting and seeing and doing back catalogs and all of that?
It seems to be drips and drabs. So it's kind of a cautious restart, I think, on the customer side when it comes to new productions actually being released or made. So, we did ask Plint about this as well. They said that they'd seen a bit of a different mix in the type of content that they've been doing during the last few months. And they gave the example of metadata. So they said that metadata had grown in terms of a service that they're providing. Obviously, Zoo Digital, for example, had told us that they were doing a lot of back catalog content. So I think metadata is one of those things that will just keeps coming. It's necessary. It helps to improve process down the line as well. So that was kind of an interesting observation from them. But yeah, I think cautious restart, really. Yeah.
No, this is one of the industries where, the fact that they can keep their head above water and some of them even grow while kind of the core engine of the industry has come to somewhat of a halt. Imagine when the whole thing opens up again. These guys are... they're all gonna go through the roof. With all, Apple, HBO, Netflix, of course, all of these guys restarting Disney, and competing. Disney, this is gonna get really, really busy. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the general consensus, which is there's going to be massive pent up demand. I know you talk about pent up demand in other industries, but I think this is one where there's a very obvious kind of gap or hole in new content, and the demand is there from audiences clearly. And not only that, but the customers or the buyers have the budgets to spend, and they want to spend on localization. And I'm sure that they will once they can.
Indeed. All right. So once again, we will head over to New York after Fardot last week. This week, we're going to go to Jack, CEO of SmartLings. So see you all in a bit. Bye.
See you. Bye.
And welcome back to Slater Pod. Today with Jack Weldy, CEO of SmartLing. Hi, Jack.
Hey, Florian. Hey, Esther. Great to be here.
Hey, Jack.
Thanks.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks so much for being here. Where does this podcast find it today? You're in New York as well, right?
I'm in New York. Yep, just north of New York City.
And snow still around?
Lots of snow. We've had a huge amount of snow over the last 2 weeks, but it's fine. There's no big deal.
Yeah, we can cope.
It's winter.
Or it's winter. Not much longer. I'm praying for
Not
spring.
much longer.
Not to
Can't
talk
wait.
about the weather too much, but I'm really praying for spring here. All right. So Jack, thanks so much for joining us today. Obviously SmartLing, one of the core companies at the heart of the localization industry. So first off, just tell us a bit about the very few people that don't know about SmartLing. Tell us what's SmartLing in a nutshell, a bit of the history, milestones, company, etc. Just to give us a bit of the lay of the land here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a nutshell, SmartLing is a translation company. I mean, it's just that simple. We're a translation company. We provide a variety of technologies and services to help our customers to solve whatever their problems are. So it's a real end-to-end solution of translation technology, of language services, and professional services. So, you want to get the history?
We need to get the history, a little bit of the history. Yeah.
All right, real quick. So we started the company a little over a decade ago. I'm an engineer. I've been developing software since I was about 8 years old, which was a long time ago. Having a computer engineering undergrad and a minor in linguistics, and was always pretty interested in how software and language were comprised. I think my brain is sort of a engineer, language. I'm a musician. I think that sort of lights up that part of my brain. And I've been involved in a lot of startups over the years. And at some point in every part of the startup, somebody says, hey, we've got to localize our software. We're selling to people around the world. And that just was always a surprisingly daunting problem, a really, really big challenge. And I think back in 2010, we sort of saw the world changing pretty rapidly. We saw, the iPhone was 3 years old at that point. The cloud was becoming really important with every platform moving to the cloud. Every platform was creating APIs and an expectation of interoperability. And I think, as mobile expanded, more and more people had computers in their pockets rather than on their desktop. And that all of these things just led to a huge demand in language. And we thought, as the world moves to the cloud, more mobile, more languages, more agile content production, people producing content to be translated, all the time, on an hourly basis, not on a monthly or quarterly basis. We thought, a company that produces the right technology platform combined with the right services could be a really important and valuable company. And that's what we did.
Got it. And, we met a couple of times before. You were also an an Air Force pilot, right?
I was for about a decade. Yeah. I was a military pilot for about 10 years. I still fly today. It was a lot of fun. And, part of that was, I lived and worked around the world. I spent a lot of time outside of the US. And again, language and culture just so intimately related. I think that was a pretty good lesson in thinking about, people and culture and language and so on. And frankly, I think we bring a lot of that, approach to how we run and how we build SmartLing.
Yeah, that was my follow-up a little bit, because I used to spend not 10 years at the military, but a little bit of time as well. Is there anything from that time that's like helpful for running a company like immediately, or is it more kind of just a general mindset when you're building a company?
I've literally stolen all of our core values from the military, just about thinking about things like, how do you execute with imperfect information? How do you, how constraint drives more creativity and how people solve problems? How do you think about taking care of your people? These are all core values of great organizations. And so we've brought all of those into SmartLing. And I think it's helped us to grow incredibly fast. I think it's helped us to better serve our customers and to balance the needs of the customers, the company, and our individual employees and partners. So absolutely.
Got it. Yeah.
So you've grown, you've scaled. How would you kind of continue to size the overall market opportunity for SmartLing, and also in the context of the wider language industry?
Yeah, that's a really super interesting question, isn't it? How big is the market? CSA will say 50 billion. I think NIMSY says, 45 billion or something. I forget what your latest estimates are, 35 billion. That's a lot of money,
25.
Right? That's
25
billion. 25 billion. I mean, what's 25 billion among friends, right? Either way, that is a lot of money that's being spent every single year on translation. I think what's important though is that I think as we think about what Smartling's role in there, I think we've grown incredibly fast. I would argue that we are one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing, technology and service oriented companies in the industry. I think it's a big market that there can be a lot of players in. And I think customers are probably looking for that true sort of overall suite of technology and services that can help them solve their problems. So I think, frankly, there's plenty of room for everybody, and I'm pretty excited about the overall market opportunity.
Yeah. And tell us about the kind of mix between services and technology then, and sort of when was that move to add services? When did that come about and how?
At Smartling? Yeah, okay. Well, actually, we have been a technology and services company from the very beginning. We tend to have a technology bent in the way that we think about ourselves as a company. And I hire world-class engineers that build incredible, scalable, secure, reliable platforms. But I mean, I hired my first two translators within a month of starting the business. And by the way, they both still work with us. One of them in particular has built an incredible business. She's built an incredible business around I think largely working with Smartling and has hired a ton of people around this. So we've been a technology and services company from the beginning. I think sometimes people don't realize that because we're building what I think are the market's leading technology platforms, and we do talk an awful lot about our TMS technology, our proxy-based technology, our connectors, and so on. But I think ultimately, a tech-only focus in this industry, in light of the market sizing question, I don't know any, large freestanding tech-only businesses in this industry. Every one of them is small. I think the market for people that are looking for only pure play technology is incredibly small in this industry. And I think, most companies will figure that out pretty quickly. We figured it out within about 30 days. That was something that we had to do. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? What's you're the expert, you're the analyst on this. What do you think? Is it possible to build $1 billion tech only business in this industry?
$1 billion would be that would be a very big and extremely valuable company, right? Because obviously tech valuation, tech revenue, tech earnings. No, I think it'll be tough because I mean it's so complex. I mean, just the amount of features you'd need and customization you need, it's very difficult to cover all of these niche scenarios if you don't add the services component to it. So I think $1 billion is a stretch.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that, I think that as most companies think about what they're looking for, I think that they're looking for a great service provider that has, the ability and the knowledge and the understanding to help them to solve their problem. And sometimes that's with language services. Sometimes it's with professional services. Sometimes it's with technology. Sometimes it's a little bit of everything. Look, the vast majority of Smartling's revenue comes from technology. But I think that as soon as you begin to combine these things together, as soon as you begin to combine a platform with the ability to customize with language services, you get a ton of benefits from this. I mean, I don't know whether you use an iPhone in your everyday life, if you're part of the Apple ecosystem or the Google ecosystem, but I would say that, people always said, oh, Apple can't do hardware, they can only do software. And then they rolled out the iPhone, and the benefits of having hardware and software operating incredibly well together. I think the same exact thing happens with technology and services. And now people say, well, Apple can't do services. I'd say they're doing a pretty good job with their services. They're the biggest company in the world. I think we're taking a similar approach that, companies are looking for a real end-to-end solution that's got to involve all of these different aspects. You buy that? You buy that, Esther? You buy that, Florian?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting viewing the industry through the lens of technology that is constantly evolving, and then looking at where and how services, support that or add to that as well. And I mean, I'm also curious, I think, to hear from you as someone who's been in the industry, or at least for 10 plus years. And you mentioned sort of starting out in 2010. What are some of those differences that you observe in localization, particularly viewed through the lens of technology, between sort of 2010 localization and 2021 style localization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think our thesis has remained largely unchanged in the last 10 years. Our thesis was everything moves to the cloud, every piece of content in every cloud-based content platform, content management systems, marketing platforms, websites, mobile apps, source code repositories, whatever, every piece of content companies will want to translate and localize into multiple languages. I think the most important change that we have seen is probably the adoption of MT. I think we were very, very bearish on MT back in 2010. I mean, our message was super simple back then. It was machine translation bad, human translation good. But clearly, and I think all of your listeners know this, there has been a profound step function improvement, massive improvement, largely driven by neural MT, neural and AI and everything else, that I think has certainly changed our point of view on machine translation. And I would argue that, COVID has been the great accelerator. I mean, COVID has pushed most businesses forward 10 years. Great businesses are thriving. Bad businesses, unfortunately, are going out of business. We are fortunate that we had an exceptional year last year. We had the the best year in the company history by a long shot. And I think that a big part of this is that COVID has accelerated everything. It's going to accelerate machine translation as well. I think it's also going to encourage more and more companies to put more content into more languages. And I think that thesis hasn't changed. So I think to answer your question, I would say that machine translation probably is the biggest shift that we've seen since 2010 to 2021.
So we just covered a company called Lengo out of Germany. They got $20 million in funding, and they were funded also on that thesis, talking about thesis, right? Of like AI, the AI agency. Like we also had Tom Tungush, the little investor at the Silicon 2019. What do you think about that? This thesis that like a custom tailored MT is like the single most important differentiator in this space and the single most important thing that's driving your competitive edge, because there's all of these other components we're probably going to talk later, like, proxy, APIs, connectors, etc. What are your thoughts on that? Like, would you agree that in the long term, like your MT custom setup is the single most important differentiator?
I would not call it the single most important differentiator, but I do agree with the thesis in general. What I would say is that, first of all, if you can't get your content out of your different platforms and into some platform where content can be bundled and organized and put through an appropriate workflow to be translated, then it doesn't matter how good your MT engine is, right? So I would argue that the platform, the connectors, the proxy, whatever you're using to get content out and to deliver that content back is critically important. I would argue that your platform itself has to have the appropriate feature set. It's got to be scalable. It's got to be reliable. It's got to be secure. And to do that at an enterprise level takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of audits. It takes a lot of things that, that's sort of becoming table stakes. Can I get content out? Can I move it through a translation workflow? Can I get it back? But I would say that I do agree with the thesis. Andreessen sort of famously said an original sort of variant on that, which was, software's eating the world, right? And I think if we look back to 10 or 15 years ago, it's clear. I mean, I've got software is delivering my television and movies. Software is running my Nest thermostat. Tesla is what? It's a computer with wheels, basically, and it gets, updates overnight. On it. Even the airplane that I still fly is basically a metal shell with wings that has a huge computer dashboard in front of it. The plane I fly for fun now. That's so software is eating the world. I would argue that I would agree with the thesis that AI, particularly in an agency context, the things where traditionally humans did all the heavy lifting, whether it's I mean, think about the travel agencies of old. Think about, any kind of PR agency, digital marketing agency, and translation agency. Definitely AI, or the ability to use a machine learning approach with all of the data that's available, that you have, that your customer has, is all going to be critically important. Look, we haven't really talked about this a lot, and I'll throw it out here. SmartLink has been sort of quietly developing its own neural machine translation engine for about a year and a half now. We've made incredible progress on this. So we're up to, I don't know, 10 or so languages, maybe a dozen languages right now. And what we're doing is we're using a customer will come to us and say, we have this massive corpus of content and data, and we would like you to be able to use your machine engine that is customized to our data to help us to translate more content into more languages across more different platforms. That's an AI approach to solving this particular problem. Of course, there are still humans involved. Of course, we have human translators that are helping with transcreation, or where the MT is not particularly good, or supervising the output of the MT, and that's a really important part of what we're doing. But yeah, I buy that thesis. I think it's a really important shift that's happening, and the companies that don't embrace it probably are going to get left behind.
Yeah, we spoke about that before, Esther and I, right? I mean, with all this funding going on, and in a sense, the barriers to good MT being lowered. I mean, if you're not on top of this at all, then you have a problem. Then you just become like a resource in a sense, right? Even as a company. Hey,
but I will say, pardon
Sure.
me for interrupting. I will say that we are not fans of raw MT. We think that's not really a super appropriate use for most enterprise customers. We don't think there's a big market for selling MT as a raw source. Again, we think it's a combination of technology, humans, services, platforms, all combined together to solve particular problems. We think it's one more tool in the tool shed. It's like, do I choose a connector, or do I choose a proxy? Well, it depends. It depends. It depends on whether, is it built on top of a commercial off-the-shelf third-party platform like, Adobe Experience Manager, Sitecore, Contentful, Sanity, whatever, Content Stack, whatever it may be. If it is, great. And you have a connector that's ready built, then plug it in. If you don't have that, well, how are you going to get the content in and out? A proxy is an incredible tool, and we still generate a huge amount of revenue from our proxy, which we think is, frankly, the best in the industry by a long shot. It's a great way to solve problems for our customers that have a cornucopia of content in a lot of different places. It's another tool in the tool chest, and I would say, MT falls into the same category.
Are you seeing any demand for MT for like website content at all? I mean, I just remember like when I log into GoDaddy, because I domain squat my 25th domain, then sometimes it switches to, it's actually quite well done. It is like a little robot sign, and it shows me like, hey, this has been machine translated into German. But this is kind of behind, I guess it's behind the login stage. So it's more kind of in the FAQ section. But generally on websites, do you see any demand for like raw MT in I guess, consumer facing content?
I mean, we do. And certainly I would say that our customers that are experimenting with raw MT in the marketplace they're experimenting with languages that they're thinking about, going into that market, or they're doing it for user-generated content. I mean, user-generated content is probably the most common place where we see our clients using raw MT. But our customers are large enterprise customers that either have tremendous B2B presence or B2C presence. I mean, we're in 6 of the top 10 software companies in the world. We're in, 3 major, pharmaceutical companies, one of which is, curing COVID. It's one of the leading vaccines. We're in, major fashion and luxury brands, 2 of the top 3 hotel chains. I mean, these are customers. I could go on and on. It's 90% of the apps probably on your home screen of your iPhone are SmartLink customers. They have a connection with their customer. They're trying to create an emotional appeal. They're trying to sell more things or to give more information. And, I generally don't think MT is the right way to create that sort of emotional connection, that emotional appeal, to a customer. But if you're translating user-generated content, you're translating comments about a review, or you're doing some, internal training, or you're doing sort of a rough first draft so people can generally kind of understand it. Yeah, we see that. We just, we don't think we think it's more sort of testing and a way of reaching more people given, available budgets, et cetera.
Mm. So I think I'd like to pick up on something, which is, these fast growing companies, fast growing customers that you're talking about potentially. I mean, let's say you start working with a really promising startup, then it scales, gets traction super fast.
Yeah.
How does SmartLink scale along with the customer, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities there?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually where we started out. We started out by saying, that we started the company by saying we were going to explicitly target fast-growing, venture-backed, potentially soon to be sort of unicorn status companies. And why did we do that? Well, that's my network. I mean, I've founded a number of companies. I sold my first company to Apple. I have a good network of other fellow entrepreneurs and CEOs and engineers. We're venture backed. There's there are many companies in our sister portfolio companies. And I think, frankly, 10 years ago, there just weren't that many LSPs that were actively targeting that part of the market, and frankly, probably didn't have the technology chops to be able to service those kinds of customers. And I think, frankly, they kind of looked around and said, "Gosh, if I was going to build a translation platform as a Bay Area or New York based or Berlin based or wherever company, how would I do that?" And they'd look around and they'd find something. They'd find SmartLink and go, "Hey, that sounds like us. It's got an API available." They focused on 4 nines uptime. They focused on security audits. They focused on these kinds of rigorous things in the feature set that they're looking for. But I think you're right, Esther. Like at some point, these companies scale really, really fast, and so we've had to put things in place to make sure that we can support them. Do we have time zone support? Do we have the right third-party security audits? If you're not PCI compliant and HIPAA compliant and SOC 2 compliant and all of the other security compliances that these kinds of companies are looking for, you're probably going to be in trouble. If you don't have the ability to scale, we've had customers, they turn them on and they literally immediately dump billions of words into our platform. If your platform immediately chokes, that's a really big problem. Look, do we do it perfectly all the time? No, I'm sure we've made a million mistakes, and I'm sure that we could have done things, better. But I would say that, our customer base is filled with companies that, have started out as, 6 people in a garage and have moved very quickly into a, public, unicorn type of company. We supported them. I actually think the more interesting challenge for us was when we began moving into hotel groups, airlines, pharmaceutical and life sciences companies, car companies, shipping companies. Those companies had a different set of demands and a different set of requirements than probably the startups did. And that was actually probably, I'll admit, that was probably a bit of a bigger learning curve for us because they didn't look like SmartLink. They looked like, 50, 100-year-old companies that were, on the stock market and worth, $20 billion.
How did you go to them? Like, how did you, how was the lead generation process? I mean, you got your Global Ready conference coming up. I guess you're not going to just immediately get all of these people to register on the website and book a slot, right? So how did you do that? Like going from this natural fit, startup company looks for log, sees another startup company or a company that kind of seems to understand their needs, and then it's a match to like a hotel company. Like, what's the sales approach there and the marketing approach?
Well, we have a very deliberate sales process. We do a lot of marketing. We have a terrific marketing team. I think that is very focused on telling our story and telling the story of SmartLink and telling the story of our partners. I think they've done a great job with how we with our website and our branding. I think from a partner perspective, I don't know if you saw our campaign last year about Move the World with Words and the book that we put out that featured translators and was beautifully shot by an incredible photographer, and she took amazing pictures of translators working and in their home and with their families and where they travel, and I think it turned out lovely. So we do a lot of marketing. We have we have a fairly large sales team that's really focused on helping companies to figure out what they're trying to do. We're trying to pull people forward into the modern way to do localization that is a combination of technology and services. And so we've got a sales team that's that helps understand particular customers' needs, and then how to help to solve them. You mentioned our Global Ready conference. Thank you for that. That's coming up in April. We've been doing it every year, but we didn't do it last year for pretty obvious reasons. We had some real doubts or concerns that a virtual conference could be done very well, and I attended a lot of conferences in sort of April. Well, I was going to give you a compliment, but I was going to say we attended a lot of conferences in sort of April and May timeframe. Excuse me. That I would say were not great. I would say they felt like a day-long webinar. But I think people figured it out. And I was going to say that, your conference, I thought the last SlaterCon conference was terrific. I thought, Drift did an amazing conference. I think as people began to think more about the production value and keeping content, shorter and lighter, and more entertaining and with great information behind it, I think these things have got better. So we're going to take a page from your book and a page from the book of the conferences that we like, and as platforms have gotten better, and we're going to do a full virtual one. We're already up to 500 attendees that have registered, which I think is great. We think we're going to get about 1,000, 1,250, maybe even 1,500 by the time this thing goes off in April. And I got to tell you, the team is putting together some incredible stuff. It'll be a combination of live and pre-recorded, and so the production value is just going to be through the roof. So it's free. Register today. Thanks for the plug.
You guys from the industry side should just all take it a little easy on the production value, right? I mean, we need to keep up here as well. It's kind of our core product, but it's tough. It's tough to get this off the ground.
You have a great conference.
Cool.
So you also mentioned this campaign, which I'd like to zoom in on, the Move the World with Words from 2019, 2020, I think it was. Let's talk a little bit about the translators and, perhaps what is the modern way of dealing with translators? Have you seen, more of a trend? Is the trend to pay linguists by the hour more advanced, or where are we at with that, do you think?
I think, it's interesting. I honestly, I don't get too wrapped up in this aspect of it. I know people are always looking for different ways to pay translators, and somebody will come up with something and go, "Hey, we pay them by the hour, we pay them by the minute, we pay them by the whatever." My point of view on this is, number one, translators need to be paid fairly and properly for their expertise, for the time and work that they're putting into this. I think that one of the reasons that people try to maybe shift to things like hourly, which look at the end of the day, paying by the word, paying professionals by the hour isn't a terrible idea. I think part of what's driving that is that in an age of transcreation, translation, using translation memory, using machine translation, sometimes it's harder to figure out what is the appropriate level of effort that's being put into this, and what is the appropriate way to pay people, fairly and professionally. So my view is, look, you got to pay translators fairly for the work that they're doing. They're putting food on the table for their families. I do think that most enterprise buyers still want to buy by the word. It's a known quantity. It's something they understand very well. It's what they've done traditionally. And I think most buyers, want to buy, by the word. So I'm not super fired up about by the word, by the hour. I am fired up about pay people fairly for the good work they're doing as professionals.
Got it. Okay. Hey, Esther's going to leave us for a second because we have a bit of a sound issue. So let's just keep this going.
Okay, you got it.
So we've had this almost wave in 2020 now with funding going into the TMS space, going into that AI agency space. Even today there was another announcement, right, with XTM getting some funding.
I didn't see
Why
that.
do you think?
Right.
What do you think? Or getting funding? I mean, they sold a majority stake to a California-based growth equity fund, I guess is the correct term there. So why do you think now? I mean, why 2020, 2021? What's going on?
Well, I would argue that there's been funding in this space for about 10 years. Sure. Yeah, I mean, SmartLink has raised probably more money than any other company in the industry, for any of the other, sort of tech-focused, platform-oriented TMS type of companies. I think, great companies that are growing, that are scaling, that have a unique value proposition will always be able to attract funding. I'm happy for the other entrepreneurs that are able to attract funding and or sell a portion of their company. Look, I also think it's a hot market right now. I mean, I think a lot of people are really intrigued by whether it's a $50 billion industry or a $25 billion industry. That's still a lot of billions, and I think people are really excited about it. I think there's a lot of people, I think the three of us generally probably agree with the thesis that more technology, more AI, more software probably is going to be really important to our industry. It's not super surprising to me that companies are attracting these kinds of funding opportunities and are able to raise money, and I'm happy for my fellow entrepreneurs.
But just generally, do you think there's kind of a macro component to this that's kind of totally industry independent, just a flood of money, low interest rates, like literally hard to get any return on any capital at the moment unless you go a little bit further out the risk curve?
I mean, you're probably right about that. I mean, look, I don't know what all of the governments. I know you're both in Europe and I'm in the U.S. right now, and the U.S. government has been pumping a lot of money into the economy as part of COVID relief. I think it's been really, really important. And had they not done that, I think there probably would have been some really significant challenges in the U.S. and abroad. I know every company is doing things like that. So yeah, I mean, interest rates are literally at a historic low. Governments are pumping money into the economy. I think your thesis is right, Florian. Like people are looking for different alternative places to make investments, and probably venture investments and private equity investments are probably places where people are looking to be able to do this. But these are professional investors. They're not foolish. They're not making willy-nilly investments. They are looking for high quality companies that are growing, that are valuable, that have high margins, that have incredible customer bases, and that's why companies like SmartLink and others have been and continue to get funding going forward. So and I think it's great.
Got it. And I'll
I
take
think we
it.
operate in a very attractive industry.
We are, right? I mean, it's just like, when I started out with Slater in 2015, I mean, I did have a bit of a macro thesis that this was going to be like a long-term growth industry, but then there's always these doubts, right? That you have, machine translation's coming around and, maybe, everything's getting automated. But actually the more tech that's coming in, the more, in a sense, the faster it seems to be growing. And there's so many new companies coming up. So it's, it's quite interesting. Really, really.
And I think COVID has probably accelerated this in a massive, massive way. And MT is not suddenly making the industry go away. It's meaning that new products, look at how many streaming services that, thank goodness they were around in COVID land. Look at how many new products were launched last year in 2020. Look at the success of Peloton and other brands and Apple and other brands that have done a great job in a very challenging year. They're not resting on their laurels. They're saying, how do I spread my product and service, whatever this thing is, to the entire world? And that just means more demand. That just means more demand. MT doesn't mean it's going away. And as I've said in this podcast and many others, I'm a very, very big believer in the combination of human and technology. Look, as we talked about, I'm a former military pilot. I fly today, and I always use the example of a pilot and autopilot. On a typical commercial flight, a pilot, has his or her hand on the stick for about 6 minutes on takeoff and 6 minutes on landing, and the autopilot's flying the rest of the time. But that kind of supervision between human and machine is really, really important. I don't know about you, Esther, but would you hop in the back seat of a self-driving car today for a 5-hour trip with no one in the front seat? Probably not, right? Probably not, right?
Jack, I'm going to have to answer that because we, unlike all these other tech, we actually have audio issues. It's ridiculous.
Well, would you hop in the backseat, Florian, of a self-driving car for a 5-hour trip today?
Depends on the geography. I think somewhere maybe in Arizona or some some flat thing. But here,
no cliffs.
No
cliffs.
But in Europe, I wouldn't do that.
But if you had somebody that was supervising it, I mean, essentially that's cruise control. That's, lane assist. That's all the other things that are built into the car. But 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, how crazy was it that we trusted Jack and Florian and Esther with, driving a car? How unsafe was that? It's going to feel like, leeches in the medical community,
Yeah.
right? So,
Right.
so
Hey, just to wrap up, one thing that I'm not sure what to do with it these days is all of this NLP stuff that's coming out, like this, and like GPT-3, speech to speech, media, all of these announcements. I don't know, like avatars walking around speaking Chinese and Japanese at the same time. Where are you following this at all? Do you feel there may be like a next breakthrough, like in natural language generation, or is this just like a couple of degrees too far removed from like day-to-day localization work?
I think there's a huge amount of R&D and commercial applicability to all of those things. I would say that, several major sort of mega trends are leading to it. It's the cloud, it's ready access to compute platforms, it's machine learning platforms that are publicly available. Like we've built on top of at SmartLink, we've built on top of TensorFlow and PyTorch and other actively developed machine learning platforms. It's a huge amount of data that's going into this. I mean, all of this. I think GPT-3 is super interesting right now. I think it's sort of a hey, look how cool this is, but maybe it hasn't really kind of found a home in sort of commercial applicability yet. But I think Microsoft just announced last week or so, they announced that they had a zero-shot new spelling checker in 100 languages that was designed to help them to, so that when people type in queries in Bing, first of all, I didn't actually realize people were still using Bing, but as they type queries into Bing, that they can spell check on long tail languages that they don't have a huge amount of content for, and they said something like 20% improvement even in the 24 languages that they were specializing in. Like that's incredible. So SmartLink and other companies are absolutely going to build on top of these kinds of ideas and these platforms and the ready availability of data and the availability of GPUs. And I think we're at a bit of a renaissance on this. But again, like I just people shouldn't be worried for their jobs. Pilots don't walk around an airport, moping around, worried that the autopilot is going to take over for them. And at least not yet. Maybe 20 years from now. But I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to hop onto an airplane that flies from New York to California without a human up in the front of this thing. So, but I do think airlines are safer because of all of the technology that's gone into it, today. So I think similar kinds of things are happening.
Yeah. Esther, do we have you back or?
Yes, I'm back. I'm sure I missed the most riveting part, but such is life. I'll listen to it back.
No, that's great.
It may not have been that riveting.
No. It was. I mean, just imagine now the complexity of even adding into a live recorded podcast like this, adding a language component to it. That would be tough, right? And again, the reason why we're doing it on this platform is because the file apparently has better quality when we download it, etc. But there's all of these complexities, and language adds a huge additional layer on top of it, I guess, right?
It does. So, and look, the listeners may or may not know, depending on how this comes out, that we've had a lot of start and stops on the video and on the audio, and there's been a few lags, and I think a couple of us dropped off at certain points along the way. I mean, platforms are tough in 2020 and 2020. Platforms have always been tough. And as we continue to layer more stuff on top of it, comments, and as you said, real-time translation and, 3D, and, they're always going to be tough. But I think COVID has been the great accelerator. It has been the great accelerator of good things will improve and bad things, it's survival of the fittest.
So what are the plans for 2021? Probably another 4 months of like full on lockdown, home office type of, but then are you guys planning on going back to the office at some point, or like, is it completely open in the air at this point?
It's open in the air at this point. I don't really want to, I don't know what to expect. We moved everybody into a work from home posture in very early March last year. We completely changed all of our goals to, protect our people, protect our customers, conserve cash, make sure we're still supporting our partners, all the things that we needed to do. late last year, and we've been in a work from home posture ever since. I'm still paying exorbitant fees in New York and London and Dublin and Kiev, and for an empty office right now. I do think, I think people are torn. I think people both miss going to the office and they crave that human connection. And look, I'll be honest, I had to kind of figure out how to be a good CEO or okay CEO, through a laptop, to a hyper distributed team of, over 200 people around the world. That hasn't been easy. And I like management by walking around. I like interacting with people. I like saying, hey, what are you working on? Hey, what's that? What are you doing? What's that? What happened with that customer? So I think people do crave the human connection. And I think we get a lot of interesting things done in the office. But I also think people have sort of enjoyed more flexibility around working from home, not spending a couple hours on the train or the subway or whatever, your commute time with this. And so I think we'll probably find sort of a way of maybe a hybrid approach, smaller offices, hoteling. People can come in and grab their box of stuff and move it to a dedicated desk. Maybe people are in the office, 2 or 3 days a week, and they're working remotely 2 or 3 days a week. I actually think it's a pretty exciting opportunity, but I don't know yet, and I think a big part of it depends on vaccines and immunity, and my top priority is keeping people safe.
Mm. Have you noticed any changes in productivity or productivity improvements while people are working at home?
It's funny, not to generalize too much, but I think my engineers have never been more productive. They're in their room, they're coding away by themselves without somebody like me tapping on their shoulder and saying, hey, can I ask you a question about stuff? I think they've never been more productive. I think my customer facing sales, marketing folks, I think they thrive on the energy of, of lots of people and noise and hearing somebody else closing a big deal at the, 2 desks down and rubbing elbows with the people around them. So look, we again, and I say this without any, without too much arrogance, because I know that there's a lot of people that really struggled last year and a lot of companies that have struggled. And I think we're seeing, companies that are selling now in our industry that I think have figured out that, hey, I better sell or figure something out here. We had an exceptional year last year. And I don't know that I knew that was going to happen. In March, I was really very concerned about this virus. I was very concerned about keeping our people safe, and can't talk now because I have to go wash my soup cans in the sink, back when we used to be doing that sort of thing. Right. I think we figured out how to operate. I think we figured out how to use, Google and Atlassian products and SmartLing and other cloud-based products to help us to operate. I think we rolled with the punches. I think we helped our customers where we could do so. I think our customers also kind of figured it out. I'm pretty thrilled with how things worked out last year. We really had an exceptional year, and I feel very lucky and very happy that that's the case.
Yeah, I think generally as an industry and as an internet-based business, one just has to be really fortunate grateful rather, right? I mean, I look outside the window, I see some closed restaurants now, and it's just, it's so tough, right? It's like, I've said it so many times, like somebody taking your laptop away and telling you come back like in a year from now, right? So
totally. Well, you're an entrepreneur, Florian, and Esther, you're both entrepreneurs. Like, what do you think? You tell me? You're operating in a distributed environment, working from home. Like, what are your plans? What do you plan to do?
Yeah, I mean, like it's actually made us, in terms of operationally, it just made no difference, right? I mean, we're fully distributed. We're on Asana before, like it's just, we've lived on these remote tools. The team is like literally all over the world. We have now 11 people and everybody is in a different city except the 3 people that we have in Manila. It made us, I think, very productive and very focused. And I kind of realized how traveling to some of these conferences like just takes 2 weeks out of your schedule, right? And you feel you're doing something, but actually just sitting on a plane.
Sure does.
And so I don't know, but I do really want to come back at some point and meet people again.
Yeah. I totally agree. I'll tell you one thing we did do that I think has been a really interesting thing is I started doing a daily stand up with my leadership team every day, literally every single day, and just keep it very tight, about 20 minutes that just focuses on, what are the 2 or 3 significant things that you were working on between yesterday and today that your colleagues need to know about? and we go around the room, and then we do a metrics review every single day of the 24 metrics that are the most important drivers of what's going on with the company. And I think COVID sort of forced that. It forced that behavior, and I think the team's more welcoming of that behavior when maybe that would have kind of been a pain in the butt when they were pre-COVID, and maybe they didn't want to do that. I think it's been a game changer. These little things like this that COVID has helped to accelerate, that says, look, when you focus on things every day, that which is focused on becomes important, right? I think that's been very helpful. So I look at 2020 not as a lost year, but as a different year, and as an opportunity to sort of think about what's worked and what doesn't work. And even though it was incredibly hard, and a lot of people had very real challenges in their personal lives, with their families, with sick friends and family, with their business. I think it was a different year, and we've tried to do the things that we needed to do to make sure that not only could we survive, but that we would thrive.
Yeah, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. All right. So let's wrap here. And thanks so much for doing this, Jack. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, both of you. It's nice to see you, Esther. Nice to see you, Florian.
Yeah.
I hope this thing works out with all the audio and weirdness and everything else, but I think it's going to be great.
It will. It will. Trust me.
Thanks so much, Jack.
Take care.
All right.
Cheers.